on the zero carbon net consultations which are happening right now?
The Honourable Nikki Kaye.
Look, Mr Speaker, when I get out and about in communities across New Zealand, one of the biggest things that comes up is what will happen in 2020. Will people kick this government out because they see a disorganised, inexperienced government that doesn't believe in accountability, or will they trust them? And my submission to the House, Mr Speaker, is we are in uncharted waters. We are in a period whereby this government is dismantling every single aspect of accountability. And let me run you through it. At the very basic level, this government said they would be this open government. And who is leading that great white hope? Claire Curran. And we know what happened there. We know in the opposition that we have more redacted information. We have arguably blanket redactions occurring across from ministers. This is not an open government. When it comes to cabinet ministers and conflicts of interest, again, do we know anything or any form of detail in terms of what Kelvin Davis actually declared? What we know is that partnership schools were discussed at the cabinet table, but we can't get information in terms of basic conflicts of interest. We hear this played out again with regard to David Parker, but this government doesn't believe in following the cabinet manual, and it gets away with it. Then, when we look at cabinet papers, what are cabinet papers? We don't need cabinet papers. We had the Minister of Education announce cohort entry without even talking to his coalition partners or providing a cabinet paper. We had Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister, announcing major decisions around oil and gas, but who needs a cabinet paper? So, gone are the rules of the cabinet manual, gone are basic cabinet processes in terms of the cabinet papers, gone is open government, but also at the very basic level, you would think that ministers would want to be accountable for things like education, for health, and we hear this week the extraordinary situation, health targets are gone. We know they've already scrapped national standards. What is this about? This is about a government that is not only inexperienced, disorganised, ideological, but wants to not be held for account at all for any form of basic targets in health and education to New Zealanders. And that is appalling. And what we also know is there are other things that they are doing in terms of dismantling accountability. We know that not only, separate to no real rules around cabinet papers, no real rules around the cabinet manual, that at the very heart of their government agenda, we can't get transparency around what is actually a government commitment versus Labour Party manifesto versus the coalition's agenda. And so when we get around New Zealand, people are saying to me, what does this government stand for? We've been through a process trying to get clarity on what the coalition agreed over the next 3 years. We can't get that. We now have we now have information being blocked by the Official Information Act. There aren't any cabinet papers. The cabinet manual doesn't apply. This is a basic dismantling of our government, and this week's scrapping of the health targets is just another move by this government to not be accountable for what it's not achieving. And why do we know they don't want any of these measures in place? Because we know they promise things that they can't deliver. We see this in education. 18 broken promises, scaled back promises, because they naively went into an election, promised the world they couldn't deliver, and what they're doing now is making sure they cover up and remove any form of accountability to New Zealanders, and that's wrong.
No, I didn't tell the member to sit down. I told the member who made the inappropriate interjection, I called him to order. The member has another 45 seconds if she wants.
Oh, well thank you, Mr Speaker. So, Mr Speaker, at the heart of why people will elect governments in the future, it comes down to trust. And our submission on this side of the House is we are dealing with the most inexperienced, ideological government in our nation's history, that at every level they are dismantling both the cabinet process in terms of cabinet papers. They're not following the cabinet manual. They're getting rid of health targets. They're getting rid of education targets. And they're doing that because they know that when it comes to 2020, they won't have delivered because they overpromised, they couldn't pay for it, and that is a tragedy for our democratic system.
The Honourable Chris Farfoy.
Speaker, can I begin by